Elias Mercer woke just after midnight to hear something land softly on the roof above the bedroom. By morning, his wife had nailed a blanket across the window and refused to explain why. Hannah Mercer was 31 years old that November, and Elias was 34. And they had been married 6 years with the particular ease of people who had not had to work very hard to find each other, because they had found each other young and correctly. They had one child, a boy of 4 named Thomas, who was staying at Ellen's sister's property for the winter, which was the arrangement they had made while the fever was in the valley. Keep Thomas away until the sickness passed. The fever had come to the valley in October of 1842, moving from settlement to settlement with the usual efficiency of illness in the hill country, carried on the road by travelers, moving from the mill town down into the drainages, reaching the isolated cabins last of all, and finding them with no warning. 3 people in the valley had died by the time Elias drove Thomas to his aunt's property. The Mercer cabin had stayed clear so far. That was how they had been thinking about it. So far. They had been in the cabin 3 years, Elias and Hannah Mercer, in the hollow below the east ridge where the timber came down close and the creek ran cold, even in summer. It was a good place. The kind of place a person could learn to read, the particular sounds it made in different weather, the way the creek rose and the way the timber moved in the wind off the ridge. Elias had learned it. He knew the sounds of his property the way he knew his own breathing. He had been in this cabin long enough to know every sound the ridge made. The particular crack of the cedar in freezing weather. The way the roof settled differently in wet snow versus dry. The sound the chimney made when the wind came from the northeast versus from the west. He did not know the sound of the landing. It was soft. Softer than it should have been for the weight that made it. A settling weight directly above the bedroom. He lay in the dark and listened and heard nothing after it. No movement, no scratching, no departure. Whatever had landed had simply stopped. He told Hannah in the morning. She was already at the window with the blanket and the hammer. She did not answer him while she worked. He said, "Hannah." She drove the last nail and turned. Her face had the quality of a woman who had been awake for some time and had made a decision before he woke. She said, "Leave it." He said, "Hannah, there is a blanket nailed across our window." She said, "I know." He said, "It's the middle of November. We need the light." She said, "We have the lamp." He looked at her. She said, "Please leave it." He left it. The owl was in the cedar at the edge of the yard. He saw it the following evening, in the last light, sitting on the lowest branch of the cedar that grew 15 feet from the cabin's east wall. Large, larger than any owl he had noted on the property before. Dark, with the particular stillness of a thing that was not resting but attending. It was looking at the window. He watched it from the doorway for several minutes. The owl did not move. It did not look toward him, though he was standing in plain view. It looked at the window, at the blanket Hannah had nailed across it, with the fixed attention of something that had arrived at a specific destination. The dogs were not on the porch. He registered this before he stepped off. He kept 2 dogs, both of them mixed-breed working animals who slept on the porch most nights, who spent their evenings in the yard and eventually settled at the door. Neither was visible. He looked toward the barn and did not see them. He noted this and filed it. He would think about it later. He stepped off the porch and crossed the yard. The owl did not react. He stopped 10 feet from the cedar and looked up at it. At this distance, he could see the owl fully for the first time. The size of it. The wingspan folded at rest, suggesting something considerably larger than the barn owls and great horns he knew from the property. The particular darkness of the feathers, which were not brown dark but dark in the way of something that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The head, which had turned now to face him, and the face of it, which was broader and more level than any owl face he had noted before. At this distance, he could see the eyes, large, dark, without the catch of light that animal eyes usually showed. They were oriented toward the window and did not shift when he moved. He clapped his hands. The owl did not move. He went back inside. He said, "There's an owl in the cedar." Hannah was at the table with her back to the east wall. She said, "I know." He said, "It's enormous." She said, "I know." He said, "It doesn't seem to be hunting. It's just sitting there looking at the cabin." She said, "Yes." He sat down across from her. He said, "Hannah, what is this about?" She looked at her hands. She said, "I need you to leave it alone. Don't go at it again. Don't fire at it." He said, "I haven't fired at it." She said, "I know. I'm asking you not to." He said, "Why?" She said, "Please." He looked at her. He said, "All right." The owl returned every evening. He had made his decision not to fire at it by the end of the first week, not because Hannah had asked him not to, though she had, but because the owl's composure under his attempts to disturb it had convinced him that disturbing it was not available to him. It watched the window, and it returned each evening, and it did not respond to his interventions with anything except a slow turn of its head. He had filed that and made his peace with it. He developed a routine for it against his better judgment, would note the time it appeared, the cedar branch it chose, the direction of its attention. Always the same branch, always the window. He had nailed the blanket thick enough that no light came through from inside. But the owl oriented toward it as if the light were there regardless. He tried the lantern on the third night, took it outside and held it up toward the owl, thinking the light would disturb it. The owl turned its head toward him, slowly, and looked at him directly for a moment. Its eyes were large enough to be visible at 15 feet in the lamplight. Then it turned back to the window. He went inside. On the 5th night, he threw a stone at the cedar. He aimed to miss, to startle it off the branch without hitting it. The stone passed within 2 feet of the owl. The owl did not move. He did not try again. Hannah had begun to change the house. He noticed it at the end of the first week, the particular cleaning that she did, which was different from ordinary cleaning. She had pulled out clothes that had been packed in the cedar chest since summer, had washed and pressed them and folded them back. She had gone through the family papers, the deed, the marriage record, the family Bible with the births and deaths recorded in the back. She had organized them and put them where they could be easily found. She had made a list. He saw it on the table one morning. Supplies to be requested from the mill, preserves to be put up, the names of 2 families down the drainage. He had watched her through the first and second weeks with the particular quality of attention that he had when he was watching something he didn't want to understand. He had cataloged each thing she did, the clothes pressed and folded, the papers organized, the letters written. And he had told himself each time, this is seasonal preparation. This is the natural thoroughness of a capable woman managing a property. He thought, she is preparing for winter in the way women prepared for winter. He thought this because it was the most reasonable explanation and because the alternative explanation was one he did not want to look at directly. She had brought out the candle-making supplies, which she usually left until February. She had organized the root cellar with the particular thoroughness of someone who expected other people to need to find things without her guidance. She had written 3 letters. He had seen them sealed on the table, addressed in her careful hand. One to her sister, one to a woman in the next drainage whose name he knew but could not immediately place, and one he noticed, that she had placed not with the others, but in the family Bible. He did not open the Bible letter. He watched her move through the house with the quiet purposefulness of a woman who had decided what needed doing and was doing it. And he thought about the blanket on the window and the owl in the cedar. He stood in the yard for a while after that thought. He stood in the November cold, and he looked at the cedar, and he looked at the cabin, and he thought about the difference between a woman preparing for winter and a woman preparing the house to be managed without her. He went to find Galt. He was not a man who sought advice freely. He was a private man in the way of men who had managed difficult things on their own for long enough that asking for help felt like an admission of inadequacy. He had managed Hannah's mother's death and their son's early illness and 2 hard winters without consulting anyone. This was different. This had Hannah's specific quality of knowledge behind it, and Hannah's specific quality of behavior, and the owl in the cedar that did not respond to anything he tried. He went to find Galt. Galt had been in the hill country since before the valley was settled in its current form. He was the man you went to when the thing you had encountered did not have a name you recognized. He listened to the account, the landing on the roof, the blanket, the owl's behavior, Hannah's change. He listened without interruption, which was his way. He said, "How long has it been coming?" Elias said, 11 nights. Galt was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your wife grew up in this country?" Elias said, "She did. Born in the next drainage north." Galt said, "She knows what it is." Elias said, "She won't tell me." Galt looked at the distance. He said, "Some birds don't come to hunt." He said it as a complete statement, not as the beginning of a longer explanation. Elias said, "What does it want?" Galt said, "It's not about wanting. It comes when sickness has been in a valley a certain length of time, when something in a house has already begun." He said, "The owl doesn't bring it. It doesn't decide anything. It arrives because things like this are drawn to what is already happening, the way certain insects are drawn to dying wood. Not the cause, the sign." He said, "Your wife knows this because she's seen it before. I'd guess as a child. The thing you need to understand about it is that the bird has already done what it came to do by arriving. You cannot change what it came for by chasing it." He looked at Elias. He said, "Take care of your wife." Elias said, "She seems healthy. She has been well all winter. The fever hasn't touched her." Galt said, "I know." He said, "That doesn't mean what you want it to mean." He said, "The owl doesn't come to houses where sickness hasn't yet started. It comes to houses where it has already started and the people don't know it. It comes when the beginning has been missed." He said, "Take care of your wife." Elias said, "She seems healthy. She's been well all winter." Galt said, "Yes." The particular flatness of that word sat between them. If stories like this find you on the road home, subscribe and ride along. The settlement knew about the owl. In the particular way of small communities, the fact of the owl in the Mercer cedar had been noted before Elias found Galt, noted by the people who had seen it on the branch when they passed on the ridge road, by the neighbor woman who had come to the cabin on the 8th day and seen Hannah's face when the owl's branch was mentioned. Nobody talked about it directly. The settlement had the quality of people who recognized a thing and agreed, without discussion, that some things were better not named aloud while they were happening. They asked after Hannah's health with the particular frequency of people asking for a specific reason, and when the answers were good, they received them with visible relief. And when the answers were uncertain, they went home and spoke to their own families with quiet care. One older woman stopped Elias on the road on the 12th day. She said, "How's Hannah?" He said, "Tired. Managing." She said, The bird's been there long enough for the dogs to notice. He said, "Our dogs won't come near the east side." She said, "No, they won't." She looked down the road. Some families hang dried herbs at the window. Doesn't change anything, but it gives your hands something to do. She walked on. He thought about that. He thought about the particular comfort of having your hands something to do while you waited for something you couldn't change. He stood in the yard and looked at the cedar for a while. The owl was there, on the branch, as always, facing the window. He said nothing to it. He went inside and made a fire and sat at the table, and he and Hannah ate supper together in the ordinary way of people who had agreed, without saying it, to live ordinarily for as long as ordinarily was available. He did not hang herbs. Hannah told him on the 14th night. She had been awake when he came to bed. She was lying on her side, facing away from the east wall, the way she slept every night now. Away from the window, away from the blanket. He lay down beside her, and they were quiet. She said, "When I was 8 years old, an owl came to my mother's cabin." He said nothing. She said, "It came to the window of the room where she slept. Every night for 3 weeks, January into February. My father tried everything. He fired at it twice, drove it off the property, nailed boards across the window. It came back each time. My mother told us not to look at it." She was quiet for a moment. She explained it this way. She said the owl came because of what was already in the house. It sat beside the house because it was drawn to that. But once you met its eyes, you had acknowledged it. You had said, "I see you." And then it knew that a living person in the house was aware of it, and it would not leave until it finished what it had come for one way or another. She said not to look at it. She said the looking made it certain. She looked at it on the night of the 22nd day. She died on the 26th. She said it simply, as a fact she had been holding for 23 years and had decided to put down. He lay in the dark beside her, and he could hear the sound he now knew as the owl's landing on the cedar branch outside. She said, "I have not looked at it. I will not look at it." He said, "You think it's here for you?" She said, "I think it might be. I have been tired since September in a way I haven't told you." He had heard her say many things in 6 years of marriage. He had heard her say hard things with the particular economy she used for hard things, plainly without softening, the information given straight. He had heard her tell him about her mother's death, about the child before Thomas who had not survived, about the particular ways she had found managing a remote property difficult. She had the same quality now. He said, "What kind of tired?" She said, "The kind that doesn't improve with sleep. The kind that has a weight to it. I thought it was the season, the preparation for winter, the work of it. I thought I'd been pushing too hard. But it's been there since September, and it isn't the season. I know the difference. I haven't told you because I didn't want to be something you were worried about." And then the owl came. He lay beside her in the dark. He said, "Hannah." She said, I know. Don't look at it. Whatever happens, don't look at it directly." He said, "But that doesn't change what happens." She said, "No, probably not." He said, "Then why does it matter if I look?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Because then it will know you've seen it. And it stays for everyone it's been seen by." He thought, over the following days, about what she had said. He was a practical man, and he processed things practically. The owl was a bird, large and unusual, but a bird. And what it did was sit in a tree. And he could not bring himself to believe that looking at it would extend its visit or change anything about what was happening in his house. He thought about Hannah's mother. about 22 nights and the 26th day. He thought, Hannah is not sick. She is tired. People were tired in November in the Ozarks. He watched her through those days. She moved through the house with the particular care of a woman conserving energy. She sat when she had previously stood. She ate less than he expected. She was not panicking. That was what kept him from panic, the quality of her, which was resigned and deliberate and not frightened, not exactly. She had seen this before. She was managing it with the knowledge she had. He thought, if she is not afraid, I should not be afraid. He was afraid. He had watched Hannah through September, telling himself it was the season. He had been wrong, and the owl in the cedar was the proof of how wrong. He thought, the danger is already in the house. The owl is the sign. He sat with that. The night of the 19th was the quietest he had known on the property. He noticed it when he went to bank the fire for the night. The particular silence that came down over the cabin around 10 o'clock. Not the ordinary silence of winter. He had grown up in this country, and he knew winter silence. The specific way sound contracted and cold, the way the creek sound diminished, the way the timber went quiet in the hours before snowfall. This was different. This was not the silence of the world contracting. This was the silence of the world pausing. He stood at the door and listened. No insects. There had not been insects for weeks, which was ordinary November in the mountains. But the sound he associated with the property, the creek a quarter-mile east, the wind in the ridge timber, the small nocturnal sounds of the woods that were always present and rarely noticed. All of it was gone. Just the cabin. Just the sound of Hannah breathing in the bedroom. He had heard this quality of silence before. Once, as a boy, in the week before his father died, in the particular winter cold that came before the final cold. He had stood in a doorway then the way he was standing in this doorway now, and he had not known what the silence meant. He knew now, and he knew without looking, the owl on its branch. He stood at the door for a long time. The silence had the quality he associated with the hour after midnight on still winter nights, but more so, more complete. The particular completeness of a silence that had been arranged rather than arrived at naturally. He went to the bedroom doorway and stood there. Hannah was awake. She was lying on her side in the dark, and she was awake, and she had the quality of a person listening. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I'm awake." He said, "The woods are quiet." She said, "I know." He said, "How long?" She said, "Since sundown." He came into the room and sat in the chair beside the bed, and they sat together in the silence without speaking. There was nothing that needed saying. They had been married 6 years, and they had been through things together, and they knew the quality of each other's company and difficulty, and the company was enough. She said, "Are you afraid?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Me too. I wasn't afraid before. I was managing it. But tonight is different." He said, "I know." They sat. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "Yes." He stood in the doorway. He said, "How long has your mother's owl been staying in a house when it comes?" She said, "She told me 3 weeks to a month, sometimes less." He said, "Tonight is 19 nights." She said, "I know." On the 21st night, the snow came. It had been building in the quality of the air since morning, the particular heaviness of impending snowfall. The sky closing over and the cold dropping below what ordinary November required. By evening, it was coming down in the soft, thick way of early season snow that intended to stay. He banked the fire twice that evening and kept the lamp bright and sat at the table and did not go to bed. Hannah slept. He could hear her in the next room, the particular evenness of her breathing that meant sleep rather than waking stillness. He heard her turn over in the next room around 11. He heard the small sounds of her sleep, the particular breathing he knew so well that its variations registered as clearly as speech. He thought, "She is sleeping. She is fine." He thought about her mother's cabin in January of some year he had never been told precisely. About the 22nd day and the 26th day. He thought, tonight is the 21st. At some point past midnight, he heard the landing. Not on the cedar this time. On the roof, directly above the bedroom, the same soft, settling weight he had heard on the first night. He sat at the table and he did not move. He thought about 22 nights and the 26th day. He thought, she is still breathing. The owl has been here 21 nights and she is still breathing. He got up. He thought about Hannah lying in the next room with the particular tiredness she'd been carrying since September. He got up. He went to the blanket on the window. He stood in front of it for a long time. He pulled the blanket back. The owl was on the sill, right there, pressed against the outside of the glass, close enough that he could see the individual feathers of its breast, the way the snow had settled on it without melting. The particular cold of a thing that had been in the night air, long enough to become part of the night air. Its eyes were the size of the moons he had seen through the same glass on clear autumn nights. Dark, completely still, with the particular quality of deep water that held everything and gave nothing back. He looked at it. It looked at him. He thought about Hannah's mother on the 22nd night. He thought about what looking meant, what Hannah had said. Once you meet its eyes, it knows you've seen it, and it stays. He thought, I have already looked. I cannot unlook. She is still breathing in the next room. She was breathing when I got up, and she is breathing now, and whatever has been happening since September has not finished yet. He let the blanket fall. He went back to the table and sat down, and he waited until dawn. In the morning, the owl was gone. He found this out by going outside in the early light, in the snow, and looking. The cedar held no owl. The roof was snow-covered and untracked. The sill outside the bedroom window had a faint depression in the snow, the imprint of where the owl had sat, but nothing else. He went to the bedroom. Hannah was awake. She looked at him with the particular attention she had been giving him for 3 weeks now, reading his face before he spoke. He said, "It's gone." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "You looked at it?" He said, "Yes." She was quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her. She was alive. She was looking at him. These two facts were so present that for a moment they were all he could hold. He said, "Hannah, how do you feel?" She sat up slowly. She looked at her hands. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered things. She said, "Better. Actually better. Like the tide going out." He said, "The fever?" She said, "I haven't told you. I've been running a low fever for 2 weeks. I didn't want..." She stopped. She said, "It's better this morning." He stood in the bedroom door, and he looked at his wife sitting up in the gray winter light. He went outside to look at the cedar tree. The tree was dead. Not storm-damaged, not broken or bent by the night's snowfall. The bark was gray, and the small branches were brittle in the way of a tree that had been dying for a long time. From the inside, the death working its way out gradually until there was nothing left alive. It had been a living tree. The dogs had not come back in the night. He found them both in the barn, not in their ordinary barn spots, not the usual casual shelter-seeking of cold evenings. but pressed into the far corner of the barn with the particular stillness of animals that had decided on a position and intended to hold it. They looked at him when he came in. They did not come to him, too. He brought them water and food and left them. That afternoon, both dogs were on the south porch, the porch opposite the cedar, the side of the house that faced the road. They spent the rest of the winter on the south porch. They would work the property in the daytime, but they would not sleep on the east side. He had seen it green and needled not 3 weeks ago. He had been planning to cut that cedar for firewood come spring. He had been planning this for 2 years, the cedar being at the right distance from the house to be somewhat inconvenient in storms. Not close enough to be a real danger, but close enough that a bad wind could send branches into the east wall. He had marked it for cutting twice in previous springs and had not gotten to it. He would not cut it now. He stood in the snow and he knew he would not cut it. He had been planning this for 2 years. He had noted its condition last week, and it had been alive. It was not alive now. The death of it had the quality of something that had been happening for a long time underground, reaching its conclusion overnight. He stood in the snow and looked at the dead cedar. He did not know what to make of it. He thought, the owl sat in that tree for 21 nights. And then it sat on the sill. He thought about that for a long time. He was not sure he needed to make anything of it. Hannah recovered through November and into December. The fever broke on the 23rd, 2 days after the owl's departure. In the way fevers broke when they had been running quietly for a long time, which was not dramatically, but with the specific, unmistakable quality of a change of direction. She woke and said, "I think something is different." He came to the bedroom and looked at her and said, "Yes." He could see it in her face, the particular clarity of skin that had been feverish and was returning to its ordinary color. He could hear it in her voice, which had a weight to it again, a fullness that the illness had been thinning. Not quickly. The tiredness had been real, and the fever had taken something from her that came back slowly. But it came back. He did not tell her about the claw marks until the spring. He did not tell her about the count. She recovered slowly and with the specific quality of someone who has been very close to something and has come back and knows the distance they covered. She was careful with herself in a new way, eating carefully, sleeping when she was tired, asking Elias for help with things she would previously have managed alone. He said once, "You can push yourself harder than this." She looked at him. She said, "I don't think I'm going to do that anymore." He said, "All right." He meant it. By the end of December, she was herself again in the way Elias recognized as fully herself. Present in the particular way she was present when she was well, the specific quality of attention and humor that illness had been muffling. He did not tell her he had looked at the owl. He told her it was gone when he checked in the morning. He did not describe the sill, the close presence of it through the glass, the eyes. He thought about telling her, and each time he thought about it, he did not. She never asked what had happened on the 21st night. He thought she might already know. In March, when Thomas came home from his aunt's property, Elias told him about the winter in the careful way he told Thomas things, not everything at once, but enough so the boy would understand the shape of what had happened. He said, "Your mother was ill this winter. She's well now, but it was a hard winter." Thomas said, "I know. Aunt May told me some of it." He said, "The owl at the window." Thomas said, "She said there was an owl." He said, "Yes." He said, "There are things in this country that are old, and we don't fully understand them, and the correct response to them is to pay attention and not do anything sudden." Thomas said, "Like the owl." He said, "Yes, like the owl." Thomas said, "What did you do?" He said, "I paid attention." That was all he said about it. In the spring he found the claw marks. He had been meaning to look all winter and had not looked, in the way that you did not examine certain things when examining them felt like conceding something. When the snow was finally off the ground and the cabin walls were accessible, he walked the east side of the property. Below the bedroom window, small parallel marks in the wood of the sill, not damage, precise, evenly spaced, the marks of something gripping and releasing. Gripping and releasing. A pattern that ran the length of the sill, many repetitions, the accumulation of many nights of the same grip. He ran his finger along the marks. The wood was worn smooth in the grooves, smoothed by repetition, the same grip landing in the same place night after night, until the place conformed to the grip. He counted them. He stood at the sill and he counted the marks, and there were, as close as he could tally, 21 sets, one for each night before he looked. He stood in the spring sun with his hand on the sill, and he thought about that. In the spring, Hannah said once, unprompted, while they were working in the garden, "I'm grateful for it." He looked at her. She said, "I know that sounds wrong, but I'm grateful." Whatever it was, it sat beside this house for 3 weeks, and my mother's sat for 3 weeks, and my mother died, and I didn't. That means something. He said, "It means you're well." She said, "It means something more than that." She did not explain what she meant. He did not ask. He never discussed the owl with Hannah directly after that winter. They discussed it the way they discussed other things that had happened on the property, and resolved themselves, obliquely, in reference, in the particular shorthand of a long marriage. She would sometimes say, in passing, when one of them was unwell, "It's just weather." And he understood this to mean, it's nothing that requires witnessing. He understood also that she knew he had looked. He did not know how she knew. She knew. He thought about what she had said. Once it knows you've seen it, it stays for everyone it's been seen by. He thought about whether it had stayed for him. He thought about what Hannah had said. Once it knows you've seen it, it stays for everyone it's been seen by. He had seen it. He had met its eyes through the glass on the 21st night in the snow, with the owl on the sill and its eyes the size of something that could hold a whole dark inside them. He did not sleep well in November for the rest of his life. He was not sick the following year or the year after. He was well, largely, for many years, outliving Hannah by 11 years, which he had not expected, dying in the winter of 1871 at the age of 63, of an ordinary cold that turned into something more. Thomas, their son, was with him at the end. He did not tell Thomas about the owl until that final winter. He told it in the matter-of-fact way he told most things: the landing on the roof, the blanket on the window, the 21 nights, the sill, the eyes. He told it plainly. Thomas listened. He said, "Did the owl come for you, do you think, that winter? Or just for Mother?" Elias thought about that. He said, "I don't know. I looked at it, and it stayed, and then it left, and Hannah recovered. I don't know what that means. What I know is that when I looked at it, I was thinking, she is still breathing. Whatever comes next, she is still breathing right now." Thomas said, "And that was enough?" Elias said, "It was what I had." He was not sick the following year or the year after. But in November, in the hill country dark, he heard wings sometimes. Not often. Not every year. Just often enough to know the difference between the ordinary sounds of the property and the other kind. Elias told Galt the following spring, when the ground was passable. He told him about the 21st night and the sill and the eyes. He told him about the dead cedar. He told him about the marks. Galt listened without interruption. He said, "And Hannah recovered?" Elias said, "Yes." Galt said, "The cedar was already dying." Elias said, "I don't think so. I checked it 3 weeks before." Galt was quiet. He said, "Maybe it was dying from the inside. Some things die in ways you can't see until they're finished." And the owl went with it. I don't know what that means. I don't think you're supposed to know what it means. Some things in this country are just the way they are. You should leave the dead cedar standing. Don't cut it. Elias said, "Why?" Galt said, "For the same reason you don't fill in a path that something used to travel. You leave it in case it needs to come back the same way." Elias left the cedar standing. Old mountain families in the Ozarks said in the years after that some owls arrived during sickness winters, not to bring death, but to sit beside houses where death had already begun waiting. They called them watchers. They said, "If one comes to your window, don't nail it shut. That only tells it you already know it's there." Elias Mercer never saw the owl again after that winter. He went back to the cedar tree each November for the rest of his life, in the way that certain people return to certain places. Not to look for something, but to confirm that nothing was there. The tree stood dead in the yard for 18 years. He never cut it. In the years after, he sometimes stood at the kitchen window in the evening and looked at the dead cedar in the yard and thought about the owl and thought about the 21st night and thought about Hannah's mother. He thought, the owl came and Hannah lived. He thought, maybe that was the way of it sometimes. Maybe the owl's presence was not a sentence, but a vigil. Maybe some things that come to witness the worst outcome witness a different outcome instead, and carry that back to wherever they came from. He thought this, and he thought, you are inventing consolation. Maybe consolation is what you do when you don't know. When the cedar fell in a storm in 1860, he stood at the window and watched it come down and did not go outside until morning. But he stopped opening curtains after dark for the rest of his life. And Hannah Mercer never admitted whether she believed the owl had spared her, only that it had finally stopped waiting.